Okay, welcome to another edition of Carnivore Bites. I'm your host, Jeff Sherman, along with Dr. Eric Lopkin. A little slower week than usual, Dr. Lopkin, but there's always something. And speaking of always something, there's always something with Donald Trump, isn't there?
Always.
Obviously a big character flaw. I mean, policy or no policy, his approval ratings, in spite of the onslaught and the pushback, that's a tepid term, but the pushback of the biased media, I would say, given the accomplishments, his approval ratings should be approaching 60%. They're below 50, depending upon the poll. And a lot of it is his own damn fault. I mean, even if you turned out not to be a big fan eventually of John McCain as things progressed, but the guy's a war hero, war participant, braver than I'll ever be. You got to leave it alone. He's also deceased.
Yeah, Trump can't seem to get out of his own way. You cannot win a fight with a dead man. Taking on McCain at this point is the dumbest thing Trump could do.
There's no winning. I mean, it's like taking on Mother Teresa because her view of non-abortion created overpopulation. He has an argument. He has an argument. She's dead. People like her. Shut up. Same
exactly.
with McCain.
If McCain was still alive and capable of, responding, if it was a back and forth between the two, that's a whole other story. The fact that he passed away, he's unable to defend himself. His family is going to defend him, but it makes Trump look awful attacking a dead man.
Yeah, do you agree with me, because it's not really worth spending too much time on this, that if it wasn't for himself and his own idiosyncrasies as a kind of not doing it justice, if it wasn't for his abnormalities and his immaturity, really, that his numbers would be maybe approaching 60?
Oh, his numbers would be much higher. I mean, he's got two main character flaws that keep tripping him up. One is that he keeps taking things personally, and two is that he won't let things go.
No, I mean, it worked a little bit on the campaign, but it undermines him all the time. And the last thing, before we move on from this, I also think he doesn't have a Jim Baker like Reagan had, or Karl Rove, that George W. He doesn't have anyone in his inner circle that knows what the heck they're doing. It's like a band of amateurs, especially Kellyanne Conway with that crazy nutcase husband of hers. I mean, what's going on here? It's like it's amateur hour.
I'm not sure that's exactly true. There's a couple of people that have known what they're doing, that do know what they're doing. The problem is he doesn't listen to them, and they hold on. I do agree with you in terms of in the specialty positions. Okay, he's Secretary of Defense and others, but he doesn't have that confidant that can say, Donald, you don't attack McCain. Donald, don't talk about this or get involved in that. He doesn't have that Baker. That's what I'm saying. He has people that are very qualified in his administration, but he doesn't have that person that can tell him no. That's the problem. That's the problem. I mean, Kellyanne Conway, that's not the person that's going to do that. No, I think his last chief of staff was desperately trying to tell him no and rein him in. And when Trump wouldn't listen, and when Trump wouldn't listen, they just went, all right, enough is enough. I can't keep doing this.
True. I think that my friend summarized it pretty accurately, unfortunately, that people get frustrated because of, okay, you're talking to the leader of France. Whatever you do, Donald, don't talk about that real estate deal that he was involved in that went belly up. And of course, it would come out of his mouth.
Right.
That was too bad about that. So yes, point taken. But in closing, you do agree that his approval ratings could be 55, 58% without his craziness.
Oh, yeah. His accomplishments justify a much higher approval rating, but he can't get out of his own way, and he keeps shooting himself in the foot.
Yeah, it becomes ridiculous after a while. So speaking of ridiculous, after a while, we have our Democratic Young Turks, and maybe all is not well, correct with them?
All is definitely not well. AOC saw her approval ratings plummet, and she responded by saying, oh, the only reason her approval ratings are down is because of racism and sexism, and it's all Fox News's fault. She takes...
Yeah, she's more unhinged than Trump. She's, first of all, again, she's not exactly a Mensa candidate, and she's proving it as time goes on. So it's interesting. They're thinking of primarying some of them.
Yeah, the Democratic committees have already said. Democratic committee in New York has said they're going to primary AOC. The Democratic committee in Minnesota said they're going to primary Omar because they can't keep taking these hits from these people. They're embarrassments, and they're tearing apart the party. They're contributing nothing. And if the Democratic Party wants to survive, these people need to be exorcised from it.
Yeah, and survive with a true constituency, a loyal constituency. That's the Jewish constituency. And I think there's some interesting news in New York regarding that.
Yes, Fortune magazine had an article over the last week talking about how the Jewish community in New York City and in New Jersey are both starting to move away from the Democratic Party. Now, I mean, most people don't realize this, but New York, if you take New York City out of it, is a red state. If the Jewish community in New York suddenly turns Republican, they've got a good shot of losing New York and New Jersey.
Interesting, and that is very accurate, true, because even though Jews are a very small part, they used to be 2% of the population, believe it or not, in around the 30s, but they're less than 1% now. They still, where they're located, even in Florida, Dr. Lopkin, if they pulled out there, that's enough to, I know it's a red state now, but even make it more of a red state. So it's a big thing. I'm actually a little very troubled by people like Blumenthal, Schumer. What's going on with them? I don't hear them saying boo.
No, the senators have said absolutely nothing. There are a couple of Congress people who have stood up to it, but they're trying to keep, party unity, which at this point there isn't any. And they're losing their Jewish vote, which traditionally has been a Democratic mainstay. And
it's a foundation that you build everything else on. It might not be, the biggest constituency, but it's rock solid. It supports them both, in terms of politically as well as economically. So that'd be interesting to see how this unfolds as it goes on. Speaking of losing ratings, I think the last topic we should address is Bernie, which I consider maybe the most dangerous person in America. They say that he's starting to lose some popularity. What do you think of that, Dr. Lopkin?
He's lost a lot of popularity because over the last few years, people have realized that what he was talking about simply wasn't true. If you remember,
do you think that's really it?
Well, if you remember during the 2016 campaign, he kept talking about Finland and how we could use Finland as a model, and he was very big on Finland. Well, Finland just lost its government because the cost of the programs that Bernie wants to copy is more than the country can handle. Everything that he said, if you look at the European countries that have certain socialist programs, if you look at the Nordic countries, all of those programs are falling apart. And he is now coming across like a crazy person.
Yeah, actually, I think in closing, and I want your final comment on that, I believe that he was a phenomenon, more of an emotional phenomenon, a pushback from Hillary, right place, right time. But he was never really put under the microscope. It was, feel the burn. It was a cult of personality. I think, as you're kind of alluding to, when given some introspection, his gig is up. Yes or no?
Yeah, I think it's less that he was, a cult of personality. I think his audience loved the idea of getting free stuff, and they also hated Hillary. So he was the only option they had, really. I think a lot of the Feel the Burn was really more of an anybody but Hillary.
I think it's well said. Well, until next week, another edition of Carnivore Bites.
See you then.
You've been listening to Carnivore Radio's podcast. You can catch us here every week. Carnivore Radio is part of the Xvadio podcast network. You can listen to the podcast at blogtalkradio.com/Xvadio. If you want to be part of the conversation, you can listen to us live every Friday at 4 o'clock on WESU 88.1 Middletown, Connecticut. You can also catch us online at WESUFM.org. We look forward to hearing from you, and see you next week.